Greetings and welcome to another episode of DevTalk, a show where I talk about gaming-related topics from a software developer perspective. The game in the background is Elite Dangerous, one that actually initiated today's topic, which is always online and DRM with Elite Dangerous and an example in a crowdfunding era. You might have or might have not heard about recent announcement from Frontier, developer of the Elite Dangerous, that they will be removing an offline mode and DRM-free versions of the game that was promised initially in a Kickstarter. I want to take a few minutes and talk about the whole always online DRM thing, the way that Kickstarter software is developed, and why Frontier development, in my opinion, is trying to fuck with its customers. I have to give a little disclosure here. I am a bit angry about the whole situation. I have bought into Elite Dangerous beta hoping to see a solid single-player offline game in the end, which it will never be anymore. And I am now actually trying to get a refund. Not because I need money or, I do mind the money that I spent on it, but because I think you cannot sell one thing and then just swap it for another right before release and pretend nothing happened. But let's start from the beginning. Let's have a look at the history of always online DRM in gaming and see if it was ever any good, shall we? So let's first define always online DRM, so that we can all be on the same page with what actually it means. I prefer to say that the game has always online DRM when the main reason for being online is checking the legitimacy of your game copy. Developers love to add various minor things to that, that might affect gameplay, and they usually say like, oh yes, it's a living world because we have these tiny things added, which I think is not very good. I think the only valid reason for a game to have a persistent connection is either a large integrated world with all players in there, like in any MMORPG like World of Warcraft or EVE Online or any other. Or a team-based gameplay that just wouldn't work without other people, like Team Fortress 2, PlanetSide 2, Evolve, Titanfall, or whatever else team shooter that you can name, or maybe other team games that I haven't remembered. Any other reason should be considered DRM enforcement. Yes, Assassin's Creed companion app, I'm looking at you. This is utter bollocks. Although, Assassin's Creed does not really requires always on since version 1, and we'll come to that a bit later. Now let's take a look at the history of games with always online DRM and how it worked out for the publishers and mainly, of course, gamers. Let's start with a company that has the largest pool of experience in the area, Blizzard. They have two games that utilize always online DRM, or at least utilized at the start, Diablo 3 and StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2 actually has had the online requirement removed at some point and only requires online activation once every few months, if I remember correctly, and if the forums are correct. Basically, you can log in once and then play your game offline for a few months, and then you have to complete the online procedure again. Diablo 3, on the other hand, still requires persistent connection to be playable at all. Let's have a look at how exactly it ended up, shall we? So if you have not purchased Diablo 3 or have not read any news, well, I can tell you that during the launch, the game had so many problems with the servers that Blizzard was actually forced to apologize to the customers for a non-playable game. Yep. Allow me to stress this. The Blizzard is a company that have been developing and maintaining world's largest MMORPG, World of Warcraft, for a decade now. They have an immense amount of experience in this area. And, even with all this experience, they couldn't make the servers for Diablo 3 work properly. This is kind of crazy, just to understand the scale of the issue here. But that's not all. The same situation repeated itself on the release of first Diablo 3 expansion, Reaper of Souls. Sure, this time issues was resolved quicker, but that just means the game wasn't playable for a couple of days, not weeks. Are you ready to wait for a couple of days until the game become playable? Are you ready to cope with the problems that the developer might have on their end, or maybe your provider sucks or something like this? It's always a risk. And again, this is a company with decades of experience in online gaming, and they still had issues here. But you have to give them credit here. After launch dates and initial problems, everything actually works pretty well. And the main reason I think people are actually okay with Blizzard doing such things is their reputation. If you go ahead and try to play Diablo 1 or 2 online now, you will actually be able to, because all Battle.net is still alive and running. And Diablo 1 was released in 1997, which is like 17 years ago, and the servers have been running all this time. It's not like Electronic Arts, who tend to shut down servers in just 2-3 years after the game release, you know, so I think people kind of forgive Blizzard for this. But let's look at someone who actually does not have all this crazy experience with online gaming. I'm talking about Ubisoft now. At some point they decided that always online DRM will solve all their piracy problems, so they started putting it into various games to see what exactly will happen. I think their first try was the first part of Assassin's Creed series. Do you remember what happened on launch day? Yep, nobody could play the game at all because Ubisoft service was dead from all the people trying to authenticate at the same time. And the game did not have any world servers or anything. It was just a simple authentication server that, you know, you have to log in, verify your game, and then you can play. That's it. As simple as that. Still was dead. Ubisoft quite quickly backed out of it and removed online requirement after a major uproar of rightfully outraged gamers, and never tried to came back to it again, at least in the Assassin's Creed series. They, I think from the Brotherhood, they started saying like, no, there won't be any DRM here. Next time they tried to put the same always online DRM into From Dust, and this time they decided to be totally silent about it and don't tell anyone. Guess what happened? Yep, was totally unplayable, and since Ubisoft did not warn anyone about the DRM presence this time, most of people actually just went and got refunds for the game because it was unplayable. And guess what happened after that? Right, Ubisoft removed the DRM a few weeks later. The next grand example, which is probably the grandest of all of them, is Electronic Arts and Maxis, an all-new fresh SimCity. And you guessed right, it never worked properly at launch, and kept not working for more than a month. People was outraged and demanded offline mode. Maxis tried to cover their ass by saying that offline will be impossible since the game runs a lot of things in the cloud. And, you know, for some reason the marketing people really love to use the word cloud as some magical thing that can't do anything and cannot be disconnected from the internet or whatever. And this is utterly bullshit. And, you know, they was pushing this cloud bullshit until someone haven't found a way to actually play the SimCity offline. There was just a modder guy who found out that you don't need a connection, you just need a sync every few hours, until the game started phoning home to check probably the validity of the copy again, so there was nothing related to the actual gameplay. That's when the Maxis stepped back and said, okay, we will release a new update that will have an offline mode, but it will require a lot of time, blah, 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 blah. People was already bored at that time, nobody cared, and there was quite a lot of issues aside from online DRM, but that's a different story. So in the end, the DRM got removed, actually. The funniest thing about all of this online DRM and DRM in general is that the pirates actually get best experience here. And, you know, it's better than the experience of legitimate customers. If anyone thinks that any sort of DRM can stop all those crazy guys who love figuring out how software works, they are wrong. There always will be a cracker who will break a new shiny DRM, and there is numerous examples of it. And there always will be a hacker who will reverse and rewrite a server side for a good game that's dying. And again, there's tons of examples of it, even in the MMORPG world, which is a crazy work because the whole world runs in the server. Still, there are custom servers for most of the MMORPGs. And, you know, you can set up your own Ultima Online, Ragnarok Online, even World of Warcraft is emulatable. Obviously, you won't get the latest expansion, but you can emulate that. And in the end, the only ones who get hurt by DRM are consumers, because, you know, they have to cope with all this shit. Because a pirate can just run the game offline, he doesn't care about that. So, now keeping all those things in mind, let's talk about specific Elite Dangerous case here. First of all, I need to mention that Elite Dangerous is a Kickstarter project, and it was funded in January 2013 with a bit over than 1.5 million Great British pounds collected. Kickstarter promised DRM-free offline version of the game along with online persistent universe, which was a selling point I imagine for quite a lot of people, especially judging by the forums. As I mentioned in the beginning, recently Frontier Development announced that there will be no offline mode and obviously no DRM-free game, so you always have to be connected. In the newsletter to backers, while answering the questions about the reason for dropping the offline mode, they motivated the decision with the following statement. Quote, "Back during the Kickstarter we were clear about the vision, to make a phenomenal new sequel to Elite in an online world, which we believe we are about to deliver. At the time we believed we could also offer a good single-player experience and base an acceptable offline-only experience off that. As development has progressed, it has become clear that this last assumption is not the case." End of quote. So, before going into details of client-server-based software and game development, I want to take a moment and mention Mr. David Braben, CEO of Frontier Development. I want to specifically note that Mr. Braben thinks that second-hand games market is killing single-player titles. That would explain online-only DRM quite nicely, right? But Frontier Development says that's not the case, so does the Braben himself. Well then, let's go through the all involved parts of it and try to figure out if that's really true or maybe they're hiding something. So, the game began as a Kickstarter project. That means that prior to creating the game, they actually needed to have at least some basic prototype of the game to be able to first estimate the costs of the whole project and to actually make some marketing materials to show people off fancy graphics or, at least some design models. Making the prototype means you have to come up with your architecture of the project from the day one. Well, at least that's how it should be in a perfect world. Not sure if that's how they approached it. And it means as well that they already spent at least 6 months on developing this specific prototype, maybe even more, since gaming is way more complicated than your typical client-server software that I usually do. Since they had announced the DRM-free version on a Kickstarter, they must have had this part as a part of architecture in the project from the very beginning. I can understand the decision having alpha and beta tests using online authentication. This way nobody can pirate your game which is not complete and have bugs and then complain about it. And in this way you can as well test your online component quite nicely with real players and real behaviors, which is generally a hard thing to pull off unless you have a ton of paid beta testers. But they managed to do this. It worked, well, decent, let's say so. There was problems. But let's fast forward to November 2014. The Frontier Development announces there won't be an offline mode anymore. That's almost 2 years later. Do you know how it looks to me? They spent 2 years developing the game. Both offline mode, which was just tested and used in-house and have not been publicly available to backers, and online mode that everyone was actually playing. And then they suddenly decided to drop the offline mode and essentially throw away 2 years of work on it. On top of that, devs refused to answer any specific questions on the topic or explain the decision and technical details in depth, which is quite strange by me. So all that's left is to try and figure out the reasons ourselves, right? What could be the reasons here? Well, the subpar and static universe nonsense that they trying to sell does not make a lot of sense. There are plenty of people who would enjoy a universe that only works when the game is running, and I'm one of them. I'd even go as far as to say that I'd love this one more than the online because I can affect my universe in the way I want and I can explore it the way I want without worrying about other people's finding cool stuff before me, I see 2 reasons here. DRM, so since Mr. Braben wants to sell more of his game, which is understandable, but as demonstrated before, hurts only legitimate customers and is generally a pain in the ass. And second reason is microtransactions. Frontier Development already offers a variety of skins for ship for like $3 each, which is actually a good business model and I like it. Cosmetic items never hurt any game. So, what are actually the problems with the whole situation then? Well, for starters, I don't believe that Frontier Development can manage to keep up the servers as long as I want to play. And, I want 100% uptime, obviously, which is pretty hard to achieve. And I'm pretty sure there will be fuck-ups on launch day and there will be fuck-ups afterwards. They already had numerous issues with the online mode. You can find the old topics on the Frontier Development and Elite Dangerous forums. First, online was deserted. You could barely meet anyone in there. You could just fly for ages. Even in the starting systems, which should have a lot of noobs flying around, it was just empty. Then there was lags, endless hyper jumps, lagging hyperspace, disconnects, and all those things that are common for online-only modes and, you know, multiplayer games with not very goodly working servers. And recently, after a new patch that supposedly fixed that deserted issue, the servers was too crowded. Yep, and you actually had to wait in a real queue to land on a space station, which could cost you in-game money because, you know, you have to deliver something in time, and time is running out and you don't have a place to dock and you're screwed. And this is, I mean, for me, that would be a game breaker. I don't want to play that. You can, of course, say, but it's beta, and you will be right. But where's the guarantee that they will fix all of that before release, which is rapidly approaching and is in like 3 weeks? And actually the pre-release version for beta and earlier backers coming out today, and I'm pretty sure all of that won't be fixed. Then I don't trust them to keep microtransaction or transactions only to cosmetic stuff. This comes from two things. First, basic human greed. Since they are now controlling the only game universe and can do whatever they please, there is no guarantee that they will actually stick to, you know, cosmetic only stuff and will not add pay-to-win components. And the second part is actually server costs. You know, if greed is pretty clear to everyone and will solely depend on the attitude of Frontier, the server's questions is trickier, and not all people know how the server side of the games and in general web is usually structured, so let's talk about this a bit more. I've heard a lot of people say they won't close the servers, it's really cheap to keep them running now, so they will not shut down soon. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, hardware is cheap nowadays, and we have cloud services that are even cheaper than the real services if you use them. But here's the deal. If you're running online game, what you need is not one server, you need an infrastructure. What you have normally is a database server holding all your data, login server that authenticate your players and route them to the other world servers that are available, and either one large world server, which won't exactly work well for an Elite Dangerous game world, you know, since it's too big of a scale, or a bunch of instance servers that can actually spawn small zones for players with one controlling server that manages all the logic, routing, and all that stuff, which actually works better for Elite. Or would work better, since we don't really know what they have in the backend because they never explained. And in real-world scenario, you replace servers with clusters of servers that would have mirrored servers that can replace main servers if they fail. So that essentially doubles the costs. And all this infrastructure, if we even take like one server, would hold up to a few thousand players simultaneously. You know, how many few here is really would depend on what code they have, what platform they use, what applications they use, what database they use, and so on, so on, so on. Oh yeah, and don't forget the salaries for administrator guys and DevOps guys who need to maintain all this hardware and software and update this once the developers say, okay, we have a new update for you. That costs a lot. And if you still want to tell me how cheap it is, then please go ahead and try to investigate how much, for example, Blizzard pays for the World of Warcraft servers, which is maybe a bit more complicated than Elite Dangerous, but still somewhere around there. And here's that, you know, ED has this buy once, play all time thing with microtransaction store. And I can really see why Frontier wouldn't want to stick to just cosmetic things, because there won't be enough people to buy them to cover the server costs on monthly basis. And maybe I'm wrong. I can be wrong here as well, and I would be glad to be wrong. But if they at some point see that this is not enough, they will start adding pay-to-win things. And this would just break the game. As a conclusion, I want to say that I still think that Elite Dangerous is a pretty good game. I would love to play it offline. If only I had enough trust in Frontier Development and Braben, I might have sticked along with an online version as well. But they failed on so many levels, so many times, that I don't have any trust left for them. But I'm as well not saying that I am absolutely right. I can be wrong, and I'd love to be wrong actually. So we'll see in a year or so that, you know, maybe they stick to cosmetic only stuff and the servers work flawlessly and there's no issues. Or maybe they change their mind and put the offline mode back, because in the end just packaging a server with your client is not a very tricky thing to do. It's way easier to run a server on a client machine than to have all this crazy infrastructure set up. And you know, you can always leave it in the hands of enthusiasts who want to actually set up all of this in their own private servers or at home to play with friends. Nothing wrong with that. And again, you know, we'll only find out in a year or so. So let's wrap it up here, shall we? There was discussion on Elite Dangerous, always online DRM, and all that bad things around it. If you have any corrections, comments, questions, or whatever, feel free to add them in the comment section of this video. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you during next update. Bye!